The biggest kind of like technical hoop that we jump through is kind of this initial experience of being able to jump in from any device and access a world with lots of other people who are all actually streaming the experience from the cloud. That's the biggest utility there, is owning your digital assets. So right now we have on the marketplace assets for several game ecosystems, the Strange Clan game ecosystem and the Wawaverse Chihuahua ecosystem. And
woof woof.
Exactly. Slack, Discord, Telegram, Teams, whatever it may be. Like, people are paying for tools to collaborate, and Passage does all of those things better.
Welcome to the Interop. Today, my guest is Lex. He's the founder of Passage. Passage is a virtual collaboration and creative platform that allows creators to leverage a bunch of really interesting and exciting tools to encourage their communities to engage with them. And it's this really immersive virtual world. We're going to get into all that today and understand what Passage is, if the metaverse is still a thing, and what it means for crypto. Before we get started, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop. And if you enjoy this content, please consider staking with us. We're validating on a handful of blockchains, including Passage. I should also note that Passage is a portfolio company of Interop Ventures. And if you're coming to Brussels this summer, you should definitely come to Nebula Summit. That's on July 12th and 13th. Right after ECC. We're dropping new speakers every week. Check out the website, nebular.builders. Early bird tickets should still be on sale when this goes out, but prices are going to go up soon, so make sure you get your tickets for Nebula Summit. It's going to be great. Third edition. We have an amazing venue, lots of speakers, lots of people. Come hang out. You're going to love it. Lex, how's it going?
Good. Oh, always a pleasure, brother.
Yeah, it's been a long time since we wanted to do this, and I'm really glad we can finally get you on because there's lots going on in the Passage ecosystem. You guys just announced this new Elite product. There's the Akash integration that I want to talk about. But yeah, first, tell me a little bit about your background and like how you started working on Passage and wanting to build this really interesting, immersive, collaborative platform.
Yeah, totally. So I've been in kind of like the creative technology space for over a decade. I started off in probably like 14, 15 with a pirated copy of Photoshop. Don't hold that against me. And then, just being in the digital
party.
I know, right? Getting into like it was probably through like LimeWire, right? Like for those who remember back in the day. That was before I learned about torrenting and all that. But then, again, being kind of like into the tech space, I cut my teeth on some coding with Neopets back in the day. And, I've always been kind of in between creative and technology. I started our creative technology studio in 2017, so like over 7 years ago now. And, we were initially doing a lot of like event design. We were doing 3D renders, animations. So very much the intersection of creative and technology. Doing very kind of like technical creative stuff, 3D renders, simulations, things like that for all kinds of brands. We worked with like Warner Brothers, Capitol Records, Dallas Cowboys, for a lot of live activations, so immersive events. And once people started switching more digital, more remote for, out of the whole, insanity that happened in 2020, then there was a unique opportunity for us to really bring out more of our side of the equation, which was the virtual digital element of these interactions, these engagements. And so we saw a lot of people doing different types of like virtual experiences, but so much of it was really just like a live stream and a chat, right? And anybody who's doing something like unique or immersive, it was very heavily oriented towards the game side. There was some kind of download, and it was going to be prohibitive for 99% of people who aren't gamers who are trying to get into this. It's just a practical tool for a workflow that they were suddenly figuring out, in that 2020 era. And since then, a big question we've gotten is like, okay, is virtual, is digital still relevant, right? And for anybody who's watching this virtually, I have to say, yes. It's become more relevant than ever. I think just that era opened people's eyes to what's possible, which is something that was already happening. I think, 2020 was just the kind of like accelerant. Yeah, exactly. For a fire that was already burning, right? More people streaming, more content creators, more interaction and education happening digitally. People trying to find ways to connect with their audience digitally, right? Like, shoot, I've got 10,000, 100,000 people watching live as a content creator. What do I do with this group, right? Because I see this chat next to my stream just flying, right? And so people are doing subscriptions to kind of limit the number of people who can be in that chat to make it more meaningful. And people are looking for just more meaningful ways to engage online. So I really do think Passage is just as relevant, but it came out of a very real world experience working with big brands. We had to build virtual experiences that were relevant, usable, sellable, right? Like this was not crazy Web3 speculation land, right? We had to build something that people actually wanted. And that's the phase that seeded Passage. So we started building Passage, entirely self-funded for a real client base in the world doing unique events. That's kind of where we cut our teeth.
Yeah, cool. Looking back now to 2020 and the changes, specifically, moving towards the more virtual and digital content around that period. One thing that strikes me is in 2020, in early 2020, and throughout that year and into 2021, there were a lot of online events. So like I organized an online event in like March of 2020. 2 days with like, it wasn't a crypto thing. It was more of like, how is the pandemic going to change the world sort of thing. And we did it in Zoom. And I remember then there was just like very little available in terms of software to do this kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Easily. And lots of other folks were organizing online events. And I think if I remember going back and thinking about it, there was this sense that after the pandemic that events would change, in the sense that there would be more online and offline interaction. Like there'd be more interaction between online and offline. So that,
sure.
A physical event would have kind of a digital component, and people were kind of brainstorming and thinking about like what that would look like and how digital would change the in-person event experience. Don't get me wrong, like in terms of virtual content, podcasting, all that stuff has 10x in terms of the software. Riverside came out around COVID.
Yep. Yeah.
Things like Hopin, StreamYard, all these platforms that enable digital creators to create content emerged out of that period. But what really hasn't innovated so much, or at least that I think hasn't changed so much, is events. That whole idea of digital and offline kind of merging in the event space hasn't really happened, right?
Yeah.
It's still like now people go to events and they go to events, and there's not much of a digital component to it.
Yep.
Just wondering if you also if this like rings true to you, and why you think that the kind of events have not gone more digital, or at least not as much as I think they were meant to go digital when we were thinking about it back then.
Yeah, because it's hard. Like it's just a hard problem to solve. And I think that's why not so many people are doing it, because even when the answer is right in front of you, a lot of people don't see it. I mean, we pitched Passage events and experiences to all kinds of companies. And we got to work with some really cool companies when we were building the first Passage events, Capitol Records, Amazon, Scooter Braun, American Girl. But we pitched to a lot more than that. I mean, we pitched to like Disney, Marvel. There was a bunch of brands who frankly just didn't get it. And when I saw the solutions they did go with, it was like, man, people are really stuck in this mold. And so it's just really hard to make that transition because, again, so many people just chose to go live stream and a chat. And because that's what they're familiar with. That's what a lot of people can understand. And I get it, because even on the consumer side, people don't change quickly, right? Change happens slowly over time. You might have a handful of innovators. I mean, look at VR. We've had VR forever now. Years. I mean, I don't remember exactly when the Oculus came out, but I mean, I think we're talking at least 5 years now, right?
I think it's more.
Yeah, but of like real development, huge
Yeah.
push, tons of funding for VR, and how much of adoption have we really gotten? And it's because I think it's such a big shift in the UX, right, in terms of how people interact. So if you want people to do something different, then we absolutely have to slowly bring them through it, right? And so for us, it was about minimizing the barrier to entry and maximizing the change in the experience, right? So that was the really difficult balance, and that's why we constantly talk about this duality of immersion and accessibility. Because what you're talking about is how do we increase immersion, right? How do we push digital events closer to physical events so that people will use them more, right? So that it will be a bigger part of the way people activate for events in general. But so many of the solutions, right? Like, again, it's a live stream. People are doing a live stream. And for digital events, what's funny is it usually is one or the other, right? If people are doing a physical event, you get the live stream and that's it, right? That is the digital component because it is hard to combine those in a thoughtful way. But then if people are doing a digital event, yeah, it's Zoom. It's some people have used GatherTown, which is fun. But again, it's basically Zoom except on a 2D, Pokemon map. And that type of stuff is, again, just so it works and it gains traction because it's so close to what people have experienced, right? I click on the link, I see my video, cool, camera's on, mic's on, boom, I'm ready. I don't need to figure out like, am I going to use like a game controller, right? Like, do I have to have this computer, right, to be able to run this experience? Like, what people don't want to have to think about that. Yeah. And that is why with Passage, yes, we've tried to push immersion as far as possible, but also at the same time, like reducing the barrier to entry as much as possible. And that balance, I haven't seen anybody else do it, right? I do think it's complicated in terms of the infrastructure, but also like, how is this going to work, right? How is this going to, how are people going to interact?
Yeah, it's such, Passage is such a unique and novel experience in terms of how you interact with people on a screen that, I think it's a huge lift for people to get out of this, this box that we're in right now, right?
Yep.
This screen, this rectangle.
Yes.
You're looking at the screen, but you're actually looking at yourself.
Yeah. Always.
I saw your deck.
Always.
I saw in your deck, you mentioned that most people actually look at themselves.
Yes.
When they're looking at when they're
it's
in
so
a video
true.
call.
Everyone's gonna feel called out in the chat right now.
Yeah, and so it's like it's a huge leap for people to get comfortable with this new experience, and I think the VR, beyond the hardware component and the cost of the hardware and the inaccessibility of the hardware, I think that's one of the reasons that like VR hasn't taken off. One of the reasons, but also just because it's such a huge leap to get into that new kind of experience. So there's like sort of a confluence of things that have made it such that like VR hasn't really taken off. I think that Apple Vision, I don't think that product is selling super well, or that the initial excitement has kind of worn off there.
Yeah, and I think that stuff is really cool. And I will say, Apple Vision Pro, in terms of AR, that is the fruition of AR, right? Like, AR trying to capture the whole world inside this little frame, not going to cut it, right? You need some field of view. But I do think that AR is like the way forward for a lot of digital immersion, because the problem with VR is you can run into your couch, right? Like just the fact that like that breaks immersion so quickly is when the physical world interrupts what you're seeing, right?
Yeah.
Like, I bumped into like, my dog or the desk or whatever. Sure. And it's like, wait, that wasn't there. And suddenly your inertia's off and all this. And what's beautiful about AR is it builds on top of the real world, right? So you have this basically infinite base to work on top of, rather than competing with the real world. But yes, like you said, the prohibitive cost, totally new UX, right? Like people have to figure out, I'm going to do like gesture control and, grab hands and what's going on over there, right? People with the headset on just in another world. And I do think, we'll solve some of those problems. I think those are really interesting mediums for what they're worth. But yeah, bridging that UX gap And you said this, that Passage is very, very unique. And honestly, I stand by that very heavily because I've been in everything. I mean, you name the virtual application and give me 5 seconds on their website and I'll tell you exactly what software they're using, what kind of roadblocks they're going to run into. I have been eating, sleeping, and breathing virtual experiences for longer than I'd like to admit. And watching as everybody's innovating, right? And we've talked with everybody who's doing all sorts of different solutions. And Passage is at such a unique intersection that other people just aren't doing. And I think there's an education problem, right? So like people need to understand how this is different. But also the beauty of Passage, and this is why it's different, is that you don't actually have to understand, because you can just click that link in your calendar invite and suddenly you're in Passage, right?
Yeah.
Somebody who does know, who is on the inside, can set up a Passage event, drop the link in the calendar, everyone can click it and have no idea what they're getting into with zero preparation, and suddenly they're in Passage, loving it, right? With this totally different experience. So there is the opportunity for people to get access to jump in without any preparation, right? I think it's really important for something that is a new format, because people will anticipate, right? Like, oh, okay, cool. This is one of those virtual things. Okay, they'll figure out, like, do I need hardware? Like, they're problem solving. It's like, you don't have to, right? Just click the link. And that's what sets Passage aside from pretty much every other platform.
No, interesting. And I think sort of what people are used to is clicking a link and opening a Google Meet and and that experience being seamless. I think with Passage, having that similar experience of entering a Passage room really makes it easier, I think, for folks to get used to that experience. So we'll talk a little bit more about what Passage actually is in a few minutes here, because we haven't really gone into it. But I want to ask you first, like, is the metaverse dead? Is this whole metaverse idea really going anywhere? Because it feels like, no, I mean, look, in 2020, 2021, like, everybody was talking about the metaverse, like Facebook renamed to Meta.
I know.
It was like this kind of hot topic that was very apropos, in the context of COVID as well.
Yep.
But now that things have gone back to normal, sort of normal, like post-COVID normal,
right?
That whole idea has kind of gone to the wayside. And I think VR and AR are making, I mentioned this earlier, but are making slow progress in terms of adoption.
Yes. Yep.
Is AR, is metaverse still a thing? And will we, as people prophesized, in 2020, 2021, live and work in sort of like AR environments, the sorts that Facebook Workplace were promoting as ways to meet collaboratively, etc.
Yeah, no, I would say in a lot of ways it is dead, and that's a good thing in one sense, right? Because nobody ever made a huge opportunity by knowing what is exciting right now. Anyone could look around and see like what's trending on Twitter or who knows what, right? And understand what is exciting right now. It's the people building for the things that will be exciting in the future, right? The people who are getting ahead of trends, who create unique opportunities. So honestly, like, you should be looking for the dead narratives, right? Because again, the whole ecosystem is cyclical, and also look for things that have real demand, real need. The beauty about what we've kind of seen is that we were never chasing a trend, right? We were already in the virtual space when the opportunity to create these virtual events came up. And then even now, right, we're still building because, for one, this is a tool that we could have used for the last 7 years, right? Not just since 2020, but since we started, we've got team members who are all over the world, everywhere from Indonesia to Indiana. And the collaboration within our team has benefited wildly from being able to use Passage, right? It's just we've seen so many ways in which it is more personal, it's more engaging, and for so many businesses that's the case, right? They're looking for a premium solution, and it just doesn't exist The best you get is, hey, I'm going to like cut out my background in Zoom or Google Meet, right? Like I'm immersive now, right? And so there isn't really a premium solution for team collaboration. There are things like GatherTown, and we can talk about how, some of the differences between Passage and other collaboration tools or virtual platforms. So there are some people who are trying to solve that problem, but there are like zero premium solutions that offer an immersive experience that's as accessible as Google Meet, right? So that's why people are just using Google Meet, because like, hey, whatever, like this is easy. And so yes, in some ways I do think the narrative has died, but that doesn't mean the problem has died. The problem is that people, get up on the horse and fall off on the other side, right? Like it's like, oh, like we're all gonna live in the metaverse, right? And it's the people who weren't saying that, who are kind of in the middle, like, well, I don't think we're gonna do that. But I do think it's an incredible tool for teams that are already collaborating all around the world, right? Those people are still building. It's the people who are saying like, no, we're going to eat, live, and breathe in there. Like this is the end of the physical events. Like those are the people who are like, nah, it's dead now, right? Because since we didn't manifest that reality immediately in one cycle, now it's like, no, that's dead. The people who are saying like, no, this is just a really good tool to solve a problem that we've been experiencing forever. Those are the people still building, right? So I think in some sense, yes, their narrative is dead, but the problem is not. It's just as alive as ever. Again, case in point, if you are hearing the words I'm speaking right now, you are watching virtual content, and there are better ways to interact, right? There's better ways for creators to connect with their community, for teams to connect with each other. Like anybody watching this stream cannot say that there is not a need to connect better virtually, right? Yeah. And so, just because we don't immediately jump to 24/7 VR headset doesn't mean that that isn't a real need, and that we aren't still in the process of creating tools for that problem.
So let's talk about Passage. Can you describe for people listening what Passage is? Like how do they experience this immersion that you've been describing? Yeah. So essentially, like what can people expect when they're using Passage?
Yeah. So basically, they can expect the best of AAA video games, right? So if you played anything in the last 2 years, that's what you can expect in terms of the experience. That we can hit the best of AAA graphics. Right now, our first engine integration is Unreal Engine, which is just top of the line in terms of the graphical possibilities, from real-time ray tracing with RTX to all the different things, right? They've got
that's all very technical, but like
yes,
what like for people who don't know what Unreal Engine is, like
sure, highly immersive, right? The idea is that what we're creating, and this is the problem, because if you're looking for something that's not as immersive, then you can just do Google Meet, right? The accessibility isn't necessarily the issue. It's the combination of accessibility. Because I've been saying, it's so easy to get in. It's one click. But so is Google Meet, right? Yeah. The difference is we're bringing people into something personal, right? Something where it's a three-dimensional experience. You can turn and see who you're talking to, who's talking to you. On these flat screens, one of the biggest problems we see is that, most people are just looking at themselves, right? But then everyone's also the same size. You may not have talked the entire meeting, but you are the same size as the speaker, right? Like there's just this fundamental like disconnect between how we present ourselves in a video call versus how we interact in real life. You might be that person who's like kind of on the back of the circle of the crowd talking, right? And you're just observing, right? And maybe you've got like a little whispered conversation with your buddy, but that isn't possible here. There is no whispering. There is no being on the edge. It's like you're front and center, just like the speakers. Everyone's on the exact same plane.
Got it. So maybe I can describe my experience of using Passage. We've used it together. So essentially, you click on this link and you're in a video game. You are in this 3D immersive experience in a first-person shooter style format, right? Where you see the world around you and you see the people around you. And I think a lot of people probably have seen demos of, the Facebook, Metaverse thing where you have these weird looking kind of comic booky avatars.
Right.
This isn't what Passage looks like today. What you see is you see people's video feed, like you see their faces, but they're kind of floating around in these little circular screens.
Pucks.
So imagine like a pods. Yeah, I was gonna say imagine an Apple AirTag with a video feed on it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Basically, it's like this little Apple AirTag sort of round white thing that has the person's video feed on it, and you can use your keyboard and you can walk around, you can turn away from someone, you can go talk to someone else. And what really I think is kind of interesting about this format, and you mentioned, is not only the interactions that you can have where you can actually look at someone and turn away and look at someone else, is using spatial audio. If you move away from someone, you're going to hear them less, and you're going to be able to have a conversation with someone else, maybe on the other side of the room.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. And I think, in a meeting setting, if you're having like a team meeting or like 3 or 4 people, you're probably all sitting around a corner or around a circle and talking to each other, right? And you might want to look around and stuff. But if it's more of like a conference or maybe a panel or something like that, then you might have folks kind of in the audience that can speak to each other and be sort of listening to the panel and not be disturbing the panel. Although I don't know, maybe like a pod turns around and goes like, shh, or something like that. But yeah, it's quite cool. And so the Unreal Engine thing, Unreal Engine is this framework for building immersive experiences. It's used in gaming, first kind of developed by Unreal Tournament, that gaming franchise.
Yep.
And you can go and buy assets. So you can go on these websites, and just like you can buy, stock footage or stock video or whatever, you can buy stock Unreal Engine assets. So entire worlds, studio sets, characters, objects, whatever, and you can go and build your own world. So, we were thinking about, okay, let's do like a kind of podcast studio where we're all sitting around kind of Sports Center style and having a panel or having a conversation in Passage, and people can come in and watch, and like they're kind of in the audience. So it's pretty unique. And what's really cool about it is that you can run this on your phone, and we're going to get into this, but all of the rendering is done off of your computer. You're just streaming. Right. It's like watching Netflix. You just need a good internet connection, and your hardware, you don't have any hardware requirements. So that's my sort of the way I explain Passage and my experience with it. Maybe there's things I'm missing here, but yeah.
No, I love that. That's great. That's perfect. You captured kind of the immersive element. You talked about spatialized sound, and the other cool thing about spatialized sound is that when you circle up, you're looking at somebody and talking to them. When we did a live stream from Passage with the Cosmos Spaces crew, and they immediately got this idea. One, I went over to a different area with Gaines, and we're talking to him while other people are talking to the other side, and that was wild to him. It's like, whoa, we're having 2 different conversations, but we're both in here, right?
Yeah.
And then also, you can tell who's talking to you because they're looking at you. And if they turn, they're talking to somebody else, or they're just, looking off into the distance, paying attention to something else. So there's a different level of engagement. But then also, if somebody next to you needs to like talk or interrupt, you can hear who it is who's interrupting, right? And that's really interesting because with Zoom, it's really hard when you're going back and forth in a dialogue between more than just 2 people, because people will start to talk over each other because 2 people start to talk at the same time. And there's no spatialization to it, so it's hard to know, like, wait, who was just talking, right? But when somebody on your left is like, oh, and you turn, everyone gets a sense of, oh, this person's talking, and everyone kind of adjusts and listen to what they have to say. But you can immediately tell where people are talking from, right? It's not just how far away they are. You can tell they're on my left, they're on my right. And so it's very natural to shift between different people talking. There's a lot of just really interesting nuances when you bring that into 3D. But everyone's going to have something to compare this to as well, right? Because everyone's going to be like, oh, well, but isn't that like... And I don't know, maybe they've been in Sandbox, maybe they've been in Decentraland, because those are also 3D experiences, right? But most of those 3D experiences, it's really interesting. There's a bunch of layers to this that we kind of peeled away as we were building Passage, right? Because we started building Passage directly in the web. So like a website that you're loading, your computer's running the graphics, all of that, using WebGL, Web3D basically. And we moved away from that because, yes, that's still technically accessible through a link, like Decentraland runs in the web, Sandbox runs in the web, but you're super limited on graphics because it has to run on everyone's machine, right? And then the problem is it still doesn't run on everyone's machine, right? Even if you pare it down as small as possible, turn the graphics all the way down, there's going to be, for one, it's not going to work on phones. Almost across the board, any of these 3D platforms don't work natively on mobile, on mobile browsers. You got to have download a dedicated game on your phone, right? So you got to go to the App Store. You got to find the App Store for your platform, Android or iOS, and maybe it doesn't support Android yet, whatever. So there's all these hoops you have to jump through just to be able to pull it up on your phone, right? So again, this is where that whole element comes in of like, yeah, maybe it's a web experience. Maybe you can click a link to get in, but only if you're at your desktop, at your desk, sitting down with your big computer or your laptop. And what's really unique about Passage is that it's the exact same experience across every device. And it is, like you said, because it's running in the cloud, it doesn't matter what hardware you have because your hardware is not running the experience.
Yeah. We'll get into the hardware aspect in a second. One of the things that I found a little bit jarring though with Passage was having to use the keyboard to get around.
Sure.
I think if you're not kind of like a PC gamer and you're not used to using the keyboard to getting around, I think that can be maybe a barrier for people. I wonder if you guys have thought about other ways to, because if you're in a room and if there's like people in the room, if you want to go talk to this person or you want to talk to that person, like you shouldn't have to kind of walk there. You should be able to click maybe on them and you're just immediately there, or you kind of or maybe there's some gestures that you can make with your hands or your head that get captured by the camera and allow you to move around or like be in a different place or talking to someone else.
All of those
I wonder
things.
if you guys are thinking also about the interaction with, because it's not VR, right? Like you can't turn around and start walking or do some kind of like gesture with your hand on an Apple Vision Pro and start moving. So I wonder if you're thinking about the interaction from the kind of UX perspective, right? The interface with this thing that remains on a screen, but that is in a virtual space.
Yes, one of the things we're working on right now. For context, we're currently in kind of the closed alpha of Passage. So we have basically users right now who are paying for Passage and onboarding into the dashboard this week. So we're kind of in that stage where we're bringing people in who are using and paying for the platform, but it's in a closed setting, right? It's kind of a gated experience. So there's things we're working on because it's technically still alpha. It's not fully featured yet. And some of the things we're finishing now are, for instance, updating the mobile navigation, mobile controls. And so that's touch-based controls where you can go in without keyboard or mouse or anything like that and just click and drag to look around, like, oh, I'm turning, tap where you want to go and navigate automatically, right?
Yeah, I actually think on a phone it's easier than on a keyboard.
It actually is. It 100% is. And that will apply once we update the controls. That'll apply to computer as well. So you could turn on touch controls and just click and navigate around with just your mouse, right? So we're going to add more and more features for navigation. And then also the beauty of working in Unreal Engine is that we have VR and AR integration basically by default, right? We can just basically update, add a new camera type or a new character controller for the different hardware. Now, what that means is you would have to run Passage locally on your hardware, right, to use your VR headset and stuff. So there are like, some integrations people would need, but it's from the technical side, it's an easy integration, right? To add VR support, to add AR support, where people can basically navigate however they want. Then they can put on the headset and just teleport everywhere or whatever. So this is stuff that we'll implement over time, adding more ways for people to navigate. The biggest kind of like technical hoop that we jump through is kind of this initial experience of being able to jump in from any device and access a world with lots of other people who are all actually streaming the experience from the cloud. That's kind of like the unique infrastructure that is our alpha, right? The MVP. And then from here, there's all gravy, right? There's so many unique opportunities for upgrading that experience. We have NFT gating coming avatar customizations, right? So you mentioned that the basic unit of presence of avatar is the video avatar, right? It's the puck. Is you're walking around as your video feed. So when people look at you, they see your video, but you can move around in 3D. And that's beautiful because you do really get this face-to-face experience. But with the avatar customizations that we're rolling out, you will be able to pick a 3D character instead, right? If you want to walk around as your, game character or as whatever. So you could switch between those, customize them so that if you don't want to have video, if you just want audio, you could be a 3D character, right? So again, all these things are going to be upgrades as we roll out more of the features.
Okay, cool. So the obvious question is, why is this being talked about on a blockchain podcast?
Yep. Yeah.
Why is this on a blockchain? Because so far you've talked about, this product that, could be a Web 2 product. It could very much be just like a
100%.
A Web 2 SaaS product. What's the relevance of Web 3 here?
Yeah, and I'll say it started out that way, right? Again, we weren't selling to the Web 3 community. We were selling to Capitol Records and a bunch of Web 2 brands. So it started off as a Web 2 SaaS product. And in a lot of ways, we want to preserve that element in the sense that we want to make sure we're building a product that normal people will buy, right? And when we look at the list of people who are currently on our wait list or in our closed alpha, one of our closed alpha participants is a remote education, basically curriculum that is working with colleges all over the country, right? So they're basically going to be onboarding people from remote education applications from universities all over the U.S., right? And this is just totally, separate from the Web3 stuff, right? Nobody who's coming in to Passage for their university class, right, is going to be worried about crypto stuff. And so, for instance, even within the closed alpha, people are paying through for their streaming time and their subscription via just a Stripe integration, right? All the blockchain stuff is meant to be on the back end, and I can explain why. Well, why blockchain? For us, as we got more and more into the digital landscape, I think so many people have experienced this. They've experienced investing a lot of time. People invest more and more time into virtual, right? Whether it's investing money into games, putting money into applications that we're using to collaborate, but there's no real sense of ownership. Whether it's all the DRM stuff with content platforms like Netflix, right? It's I'm paying for this, these movies, these films. I bought a video on Amazon Prime, right? Not even my subscription, but I bought this movie, right? For 12, 13 bucks. But if I don't update the app, or if I don't, if I don't download the app, then I can't watch it, right? There is this sense where people are more and more of our stuff, our collaboration, our life is digital, and we own less and less of it, right? So that's been a big rough point for people in this transition to more and more digital content, digital collaboration, is there is a greater lack of ownership. That's why blockchain is important to this application. But for us, we want to not simply push people onto the virtual. We want this to be a collaboration between virtual and physical. We want this to be something people can integrate across physical events, things like that. But in that sense, we want to preserve as much of the real world ownership as possible in this process. So the biggest application for the Passage blockchain, which is a Cosmos SDK chain, layer 1 chain, that's been producing blocks for over a year and a half now, and the token's been public since last August. The biggest utility there is owning your digital assets. So right now we have on the marketplace assets for several game ecosystems, the Strange Clan game ecosystem and the Wawaverse Chihuahua ecosystem. And
woof woof.
Exactly. And those assets, the goal is that you own your digital experience, right? So those gaming communities want people to own their characters. But we've also launched, we have a few collections of avatar customizations, which again, we're rolling out in the closed alpha, and level customization. So Unreal Engine assets that people can own on the blockchain, right? owning the 3D data, actually having something tangible data that has some type of inherent value on chain. That's the goal, right? Some of the other big things that we're pushing for that I think are revolutionary, but still kind of in the future. We've been working on a relationship protocol where you actually own the relationships that you make in Passage. So whether it's followers or friends, these are an asset on the blockchain that you could theoretically take to another platform. So those are the things that are really important, I think, for integrating blockchain and the value of blockchain in Passage. There's a really, really unique synergy between the Passage platform and the Passage chain, which includes the Passage marketplace, Passage open source developments. And they both offer really unique value proposition for ownership of digital assets and then utility, a place to use those digital assets. But the beauty of the blockchain is that all those assets, because you would own the 3D data, it's not just usable on Passage. Technically, you could take those assets and implement them somewhere else. Somewhere could build a platform that is compatible with Passage relationships, Passage 3D assets, so that you can use your characters or your different level pieces on a different platform, right? And that's the goal. That's the goal of real ownership, is that it's not just usable on our platform, but that it's just a relevant asset anywhere that you are using your digital life.
Yeah, interesting. Why build this as a full-fledged sovereign Cosmos SDK chain? I mean, like, you could conceivably build this as an L2 or build it using partial set security.
Yes.
I mean, are there reasons, sort of technical reasons, why you need the full sovereignty of the app chain, the validator set? Like, are the validators providing Oracle data or something like that?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So the biggest part of it is just having flexibility, right? In terms of, like, I would say there is a unique sovereignty, right, to having a distinct layer one chain, your own validator set. I can't really get into all the technicals because I'm not as well versed in that. But the general idea just being that even at a blockchain level, Passage is not by any means right now anything novel, right? We're pretty close to vanilla Cosmos SDK chain, right? So, but in terms of the fruition of this, keeping our options open, keeping us as agile as possible, the amount of customization and optimization that we can do specifically for 3D, and this is what I think is really unique about Passage, is that there are so few other people integrating real ownership of 3D assets. There's a lot of hey, you own your character, right? But really, you don't. What you own is permission in a permission system to have access to a permissioned asset through your permissionless asset. So your permissionless asset gives you permission in a permission system to use this character, right? So absent the game, the permissioned game, you own nothing, right? You just own, a couple of numbers on a blockchain. So for us, the goal is really ownership of the 3D assets themselves, that, the raw binary data of the FBX, the textures, the elements that go into the 3D asset, the rig, the animations, that all of this stuff would actually be owned by the end user. And I can't speak, entirely on the technical side, what goes into optimizing the chain for moving and leveraging this type of data, for building out indexing for this type of data and things like that. Again, oracles and stuff like that would allow people to use this data across different ecosystems. But that's the goal, right? Is that we really do want to innovate in this space, and it requires a certain amount of sovereignty to do so, to make sure we can optimize for what is a very niche use case, but also wildly relevant in a world where people are interacting digitally more and more often.
Okay, cool. So you guys recently announced a partnership with Akash, and from my understanding, a lot of the 3D rendering in Passage is being done on the Akash network. Can you explain?
Yeah,
this is how you're working with Akash and how it's better than you're using centralized servers or other sort of computational resources?
Yep, absolutely. So one of the decisions we made from the outset, right? It's really wild how little we have compromised on immersion or accessibility. I mean, in some ways, this is just as accessible or more accessible than like YouTube, Google Meet. It's one click and you're in, right? I mean, it is dead simple. And then immersion, we have the best possible graphics. Now, you go and look at something like the games, Strange Clan, Wawa, like they can be more stylized, more cartoony. But then you look at some of the environments like DeFi Dojo, and it can be extremely realistic, all within the same game engine. So no compromises there. Well, you have to compromise somewhere, right? And the compromise for us has been, one, our sanity in building out this wild system, but then two, cost, right? It is more computationally expensive to host these experiences than anything else, right? I mean, I remember when I used to think, when we were first doing Passage, I used to think that the video hosting was expensive, like doing the whole webcams. But then we were still rendering everything in the browser. So your computer was bearing the computational cost, not us. That was early on in Passage when we were launching, our event with Amazon, for instance. But that doesn't even, the computational resources of video feeds doesn't even, shake a finger at the computation of 3D worlds, right? I mean, we're talking each user on Passage occupies about half of a GPU. Now, these can be anywhere from like commercial, for those who care, commercial GPUs to high-end GPUs. So like we have a good range of cost depending on, we'll basically have, right now it's all one tier of GPU that you're getting when you jump into Passage, but eventually we'll probably have like tier 1 and tier 2 worlds, some worlds that require a little more GPU power to run, so that people can get the most out of the hardware. But So it's not like the most expensive GPUs that we're using for Passage, but you're still occupying half a GPU, which, and for anybody who hosts a website or whatever, like, that like maybe you use a couple CPU threads for your website for the whole month for all your visitors, right?
Yeah.
The computational demand of Passages is big, right? Imagine you got to use half of this big glowing monster for every single person. You need one of these for every 2 people who are going to be in an event. So that said, it can be expensive to run. Now, our belief was basically that, and this was 4 years ago that we started building this. So our belief was that it's okay to compromise on price. That can be the compromise because this is the one thing that will change fastest, right? And I think we've been affirmed in that. People's UX journey is not going to be expedited. It's going to be slow, and people are not going to adopt a new user experience quickly. But the price of hardware will adapt quickly, and it has. I mean, I believe we've seen as much as a 60% drop in GPU costs from the time that we were building this in 2020. So we've worked with both GCP, Google Cloud, as well as AWS, right? We've used a bunch of different cloud solutions. Passage is cloud agnostic. We can leverage any architecture. But point being, we've seen the best and the worst pricing in cloud compute, and it's gotten way better since 2020 because again there's been a lot of push for GPU infrastructure for AI and for all sorts of different applications. That said, it's still relatively more expensive than any other kind of hosting. So this is where Akash comes in. Akash is the first really open market for GPUs, right? I mean, in terms of people offering GPUs for real world product use, you've got Azure, Google Cloud, AWS. That's it. 3 people. Right? There's like 3 people competing with each other. And so it's a little bit of a rigged market, right? You can't really call this an open market. But what Akash does is it allows anybody all over the world to contribute GPU compute to their decentralized cloud marketplace, and anybody can buy it. And the relationship between provider and the person leasing the hardware is governed by smart contracts, right? So the beauty of that is there's censorship resistance. There's a bit of security just in terms of infrastructure. It's actually more reliable in a lot of ways than AWS. AWS has been down at times when Akash wasn't. So the uptime's better. But then there's a lot of advantages to Akash, but the biggest advantage of having an open marketplace is true price discovery, right? The cost of a GPU, the same GPU on Akash versus AWS is, I mean, up to 10 times cheaper. And for us personally, we've seen cost reductions integrating Akash of 70 up to 70% for the GPUs that we're using. And there are GPUs you can get on Akash you just cannot get on AWS because there's so little availability, and you've got to go through a whole a permissioned process to get approved to get these GPUs, all that nonsense. With Akash, in 1 day, in 1 hour, you can have your developer, get your AKT and set up your lease, and you have access, instant access to hardware that isn't even available anywhere else, but for a price that's 10 times cheaper. So that's wild. That's super wild. And we've been using that. So we've been putting more and more of our systems onto Akash. And
how's that been? Like, I mean, what's the integration experience? I mean, I know you're not sort of, on the technical side, but how easy is it to integrate with Akash and leverage those resources for what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say easy, right? I mean, okay, it's becoming easier and easier depending on your use case because there's more people building tools for leveraging Akash compute. So, you can go and launch a WordPress website in Akash in just a few clicks using some of their native tools built by teams like CloudMos, right? So it can be stupid easy. Now, I am biased because we have some really smart developers. Our CTO is brilliant, and so we're definitely skewed on the side of being high level developers. So, for just your kind of average run of the mill full stack dev, there might be a learning curve. You've got to be able to work with Kubernetes. There's some containerization stuff you have to understand. But the beauty about Akash is it's built for scale, right? Now that does make it, in some sense, a little bit more complicated than it could be. But for people who have big enterprise applications, it's perfect. There's so much really, really good architecture built into the Akash network. So, yeah, I would say any barrier that's there for your kind of run-of-the-mill full stack dev is a good one, right? It's one that's going to create sustainability and scalability. So, yeah, I would say overall dev experience is phenomenal. The community is phenomenal. There's a huge open source community building around Akash. Everything on Akash is open source. So really, really easy to contribute to development. A lot of people building tools for Akash. So, I mean, jump in the Discord and you'll get your questions answered stat. I mean, really, really great community building around that. So that really helps developer adoption.
Cool. No, I mean, it's a great use case, I think, also for Akash to, Akash, I think, has made this sort of pivot into the GPU marketplace vertical. We had Greg on several months ago where we talked about this. You can go back and listen to that episode if you're interested.
Yes, he's brilliant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is just another use case, I think, that demonstrates just how powerful Akash is as a marketplace for compute.
Oh, yeah.
Not only for use cases outside of crypto, but use cases in crypto as well.
We did a booth takeover of the Akash booth at ETH Denver. And it was so easy to sell people on this, right? So we're talking to people about Akash, and they're like, oh, you're from Akash? Like, no, I'm from PASG, and we're saving 70% on our GPU bill. Boom, sold, right? Like, it's just wild in terms of anybody who understands the need for GPU resources can immediately see the value proposition. So it's an easy sell, and we love having those conversations because it's been huge for us. And we're just trying to move more and more of our services, our infrastructure stack over to Akash. So right now we have a little Akash button in the dashboard where you can launch an event on Akash versus AWS. And it's my favorite feature so far because it's kind of like the instantly save money button.
So you guys recently announced this PASG Elite product.
Yes.
Can you talk more about that? What's this PASG Elite?
So PASG as a platform, the first thing we hear when people jump into PASG, I've done hundreds, probably close to 1,000 demos in PASG over the last 4 years, right? And the first thing I hear is like, oh, could you do this? Could you do this? Like, people have so many ideas when they come into PASG. And all of those things are real and legitimate. I mean, there's applications, again, from gaming to live streaming to conventions to enterprise, sales. There's a bunch of really unique applications for different types of collaboration, community building, whatever. And I've heard it all. medical field, right? Like health and fitness. And they're all phenomenal ideas because Passage just makes virtual collaboration easier. It brings an immersive 3D experience to people who never could have had that type of experience because they're not a gamer. They don't have a gaming PC or whatever. That said, we have to start somewhere. And Passage Elite is the beginning. It is really the kind of the first product offering from the Passage suite of products that is meant specifically for, it's starting with this enterprise and education use case. These are the biggest immediate demands in the market we've seen. Verticals that have, just really big total addressable market, but also very, very narrow and specific, right? It's a very clear value proposition with a huge audience that's already paying for these tools. Slack, Discord, Telegram, Teams, whatever it may be. Like people are paying for tools to collaborate, Zoom. And Passage does all of those things better in terms of communication, collaboration, being able to interact with your team, being able to pull people in from outside your team, right? Be able to do a sales call on Passage for a premium product that you can actually demonstrate in 3 dimensions. So it serves a unique enterprise need for teams that are collaborating, educators that are bringing people, salesperson's kind of like an educator, right? So there's a lot of overlap between the enterprise and education use cases. That's what we're addressing first. Elite describes a very, very distinct set of features that Passage is offering now. Over time, Passage will grow to become a social platform. I really do believe that's part of how it will develop. But it can't start there because the social platform is always limited by this network effect, right? If you don't already have a network of millions of people, then there's no use in this in Passage as a social platform because I'm not going to find any of my friends there, right? I'm not going to find necessarily the people I want to follow. So first, Passage is something that people use for enterprise, for education. Content creators can use it, right? So it can still be a creator platform, but you are speaking to your audience, not necessarily to a public, open social platform, right? People come to Passage to interact directly, and that's what Elite is. Over time, as we have more and more elite users, elite groups, teams, creators, collaborating with their community, whether it's your team or your followers, whatever it may be, then we can start to connect those communities into a larger social network, right? But that's something that's going to happen over time. And basically, the way we're rolling this out, the MVP, the first product offering, is kind of narrow and focused, and that's Elite, right? And it addresses some really specific use cases in terms of collaboration. That's kind of what dictates what features we're rolling out first.
So where do we go from here? What's the roadmap, and what are some exciting things that people can expect from Passage?
Yeah.
Maybe you can give us some Passage alpha here.
Oh, 100%. So for one, by the time this drops, you will be seeing basically showcases. So on Tuesday, the 18th, we'll be showcasing some of our very first closed alpha users, people who are leveraging Passage right now, who have been onboarded into the platform and are using it, paying for their streaming, using the whole suite of tools to work with their team. Go check them out. Check out those use cases. We've got, again, people from education to enterprise, Web3, educators, communities who are using this in the closed alpha. And if you identify with one of those use cases, jump on the waitlist, right? Because what we're doing is we're pulling people in from the waitlist during the closed alpha. We're looking to connect with people who have a unique synergy early on, who can help in kind of this early phase of development and adoption before we open up to the public, right? We're trying to bring in the people who have the most possible synergy with the current feature set so that we can make this everything it needs to be for the public launch end of summer, right? So that's the goal right now. Check out what we're putting out. We're putting out videos. Over the next 2 weeks, we'll be showcasing all of our current closed alpha users. So check those out, follow along, and you're going to see something that sparks an idea, sparks an interest. Reach out, jump in the Discord, connect with us, because we're looking for more people to pull into the pipeline. We currently have 3,000 to 4,000 people on the wait list. We have not yet opened up kind of like a filtering process. We haven't opened up applications yet. So you can jump on there or jump in the Discord, to get a more direct connection to us. and we'll start pulling people in. We'll open up applications and we'll pull people in, one group at a time based off of the synergy that we see, right? So it's a little bit of a hand-picked process initially. It's permissioned. Sorry, guys, not permissionless. But we're working towards that so we can make this everything it can be. And if you want to be a part of that process, if you want to help this look like your use case, if you see something that's exciting to you, to your team, to your community, reach out. You can get involved.
Cool. Well, looking forward to seeing those use case demonstrations and also maybe getting my hands on this alpha.
Heck yeah. Yep. We'll get you in. We'll get you in.
Give it a try. I think there's like some things that we've been thinking about doing, maybe doing some content in there or hosting some events. Who knows? There's like all sorts of ways that I think we could use Passage. So yeah, Lex, thanks for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure, brother. Always a pleasure to chat and super excited to get you in.